Hey everybody! Princess Maker is a distinctly Japanese series of life simulator, or more specifically, raising up games, developed and published by anime giant Gainax, mostly known these days for the animes Neon Genesis Evangelion and Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann. But they were also very successful in the late 80s, early 90s, and in 1991 released Princess Maker 1 for the MSX2 computer system. The premise of Princess Maker 1 is essentially the same as it will be for the whole rest of the series. Usually, following some disastrous event, you, the player, are entrusted with the raising of a 10-year-old girl. You'll put her to work, enroll her in classes, and send her off into the untamed wilderness hoping she doesn't get beset upon by wolves. If you do very well, your girl will become a princess. If you don't do so well, she won't. There are reportedly 74 different endings available depending on what stats you raise, how popular she is, and so on. None of which I've seen because I can't get the third disc to run properly, so my baby is stuck at age 12. Princess Maker comes on 7 discs, by which I absolutely mean floppies, with the intro taking up what seems to be an entire disc by itself, and if you want to go on vacation, that's a separate disc too. But hey, on the upside, there's voice acting. Princess Maker is a charming game, not without its flaws, but it helped lay the groundwork for the series that would come later. The core idea of time management and balancing stat ups with stat downs never really changes, though the execution changes a little. In Princess Maker 1, at the end of each month, you pick 3 activities for the next month, each activity occupying roughly 10 days of time. There are 3 classes you can send her to, which will raise some of her stats outright, but all cost money. To pay for the classes, there's a collection of jobs to choose from, which will also raise some stats while lowering others, according to what kind of work it is. For instance, woodcutting makes you stronger, but at the expense of your more elegant stats. On top of this, you only get paid for work you successfully complete, so if you're not very good at a job, say because your stats aren't high enough yet, you won't get paid for it. This can be brutal. The other main activity is adventuring, the opportunity to use your military training. Here, the game becomes more of an RPG, running your daughter around from a top-down view, looking for items and getting into fights, which also provide the opportunity for some stat ups and downs. They're also a bit much for a 10-year-old to handle, so stay in school, okay kids? Work and school are also, unfortunately, stressful, and the more fatigued she is, the less capable your daughter is of working or learning, which leads to the last options on the menu, resting and vacationing. Resting costs a little bit of money and alleviates a little bit of fatigue. Vacationing costs a lot of money, but alleviates a lot of fatigue. Unless, of course, you get fatigued from swapping discs. I know I do. Princess Maker for the MSX2 never got an English translation or release. The version here is a fan translation made available online by Tio Lopez del Castillo. And yeah, it's hokey, but the dude translated from Japanese to both English and Spanish, which means he knows way more languages than I do, and he did it for free. That's rad. Nice work. Princess Maker did, however, eventually get an English release in the form of Princess Maker Refine, originally released March 6, 2003? Possibly involving a company called Cyberfront Corporation? Okay, the details are really hazy, and I don't speak Japanese, and the only thing the wiki says is around 2002 to 2005, so god, I don't know. What I do know is Princess Maker Refine was later translated by CFK Co. Limited, and published to Steam on February 17, 2017. Which seems late. I also know that it's sort of unbearable to play. Now, perhaps it's just me. I do run a show called Nostalgia Trip, so my tolerance for old UIs is high and my love for pixel art is immense, but something about Princess Maker Refine is terribly unappealing to me. It could be the use of 5 different fonts on the same UI. It could be the strange glow applied to everything. It could be the fact that I can't find a place to put the primary menu that doesn't get in the way of any of the other 10 menus that pop up. It could be that I'm just an old man, opposed to change in all its forms, but it's probably one of the other 3. Refine feels, to me, incredibly cramped, and this is true of the original as well. But with the version on the MSX2, I feel as though that space was used better. The font was bigger, making it much more legible, and the way buttons on the UI were replaced to make way for new ones, rather than popping up a separate menu for them, was a good move that worked within the screen space limitations. That said, my experience is with the fan translation, which didn't exactly need space for a whole lot of words. Perhaps in Japanese, the extra space and extra dialogue added some much needed heart and soul to the Refine edition. But as an English player, I can't say I'm terribly impressed with CFK's professional translation work, and I'll talk about that again later. Otherwise, barring a bit of censorship, Princess Maker Refine is more or less the same as the original, so we'll move on. Princess Maker 2. This is the one that I think most people know, owing to the fact that it actually had a complete, professional English translation, which was never officially published, and thus has been tossed around as abandonware among English-speaking internet communities probably ever since the intended publisher, Intercorp, went bankrupt. My own initial exposure to this game was from a screenshot Let's Play on the Something Awful forums back in 2007, which was probably aged poorly, much like the forums themselves. Regardless, this translation by Soft Egg, a 5-man team, is absolutely incredible in terms of polish and immersion, and this lends a lot to Princess Maker 2 itself. Initially released in 1993 for the PC-98 and later MS-DOS, FM Towns, PC Engine, GP32, Mac, Windows 3.1, Sega Saturn, and PlayStation 2, Princess Maker 2 operates, in many ways, quite similar to Princess Maker 1. In the aftermath of a bloody war with the devil, you're gifted a child. Though rather being charged with an orphan by the king, your new daughter comes down from Uranus. Okay, it's not always Uranus. Her goddess changes based off of her birthday. This also has an effect on her stats, both to begin with and in some events that take place during the game. For instance, Venus's primary stat is Charisma. They also have unique speaking text when you're saving your game. That's neat. Mechanically, Princess Maker 2 plays a lot like Princess Maker 1 with a lot of extra thrown in. Most good and some bad. The schedule is the same, 3 activities of roughly 10 days each, though there are more jobs and more classes to pick from. Adventuring has fleshed out, with 4 locations to pick from and a slightly tweaked combat system, and in terms of caring for your daughter, you have a little bit of help this time, in the form of Cube, the butler. He helps by giving you warnings when your daughter is becoming too stressed and may become sick, something that was also present in Princess Maker 1, and by tossing in small amounts of advice here and there. It's not exactly a modern tutorial, but it does help smooth the gap between the player and the game by letting Cube address you directly with knowledge that the daughter probably wouldn't have. Cube was also popular enough to carry forward through the series and is a marriage candidate in this one, but enough about the butler. Princess Maker 2 is arguably the most brutal of the series. There are a lot of secrets, and a lot of mistakes you can make without realizing that they're mistakes. On top of this, there are a lot of events that are more or less random, and can be detrimental to your game if they occur at the wrong time. Sometimes you're just not told things either, which, well, is pretty much the standard for gaming in the 90s, but it does make it so Princess Maker 2 is sometimes frustrating without a guide. Don't get me wrong, that's definitely a style that can be appealing, particularly if you're sick of hand-holding in modern games. While true of all the Princess Makers in a way, Princess Maker 2 in particular places a huge emphasis on the idea of playing through multiple times, picking apart the game and figuring out just the right way to get the ending that you want. More so than with the others, your first run through Princess Maker 2 is probably going to go poorly. For me personally, I prefer the gentler releases, the ones that don't make me want to save scum away all of my mistakes. One of the prime examples of this is in the job system and the stress mechanic. The way the stress mechanic works is, your quote-unquote maximum stress is directly linked to your constitution score. The higher your constitution is, the more stress you can accumulate without negative effects. Those negative effects starting with a higher likelihood of poor job performance and accumulating in sickness. The trouble with this is, when you're first starting out, a few days of work, not a few schedule assignments of work, but a few calendar days of work, will tire the daughter out so badly that her work performance will be basically shot for the rest of the assignment. This results in wasted days, and, since the game ends when she turns 18, that's wasted time. It also doesn't make you any money, so you can't take classes, so you can't get better at your chosen work, so you can't... you get the gist. The way to deal with this is basically to stack constitution, which means working at the farm. Working at the farm raises constitution, but lowers refinement. It's very easy work, which means it produces reliable income, and, theoretically, it makes you better at other jobs, because you can work them longer without getting tired. Furthermore, once you've worked a job long enough, you get a permanent raise, which means that job you're already, presumably good at, makes you even more money, so you keep working it. But wait, what happens to your refinement then? Well, it keeps going down, and it will keep going down, probably faster than you can pay for classes to raise it, as long as you keep working at the job that makes you the most money, which you need to pay for classes. This is the big stat balance mechanic of the game, figuring out when to move to other, lower paying, more unreliable jobs, and how to then cover the financial gap you've imposed upon yourself. This isn't bad. It's one of the focal mechanics, the planning and strategy part of Princess Maker. However, the way Princess Maker 2 accomplishes it is, well, it does it by railroading you into farming for the first couple years, essentially, which is less than ideal. There are some jobs, like working at the inn or the restaurant, about which guides online will flat out say, yeah, there's no point working here, because the benefits and the wages that you get from them don't stack up against other jobs, or even just paying for classes through the higher paying jobs. The stat distribution, that is, which jobs and classes raise and lower which stats, in Princess Maker 2 is really restrictive. For instance, working at the bar or cabaret is the only way, barring events, to raise charisma, and you only unlock those jobs at age 15. A lot of the jobs can end up feeling redundant or counterproductive, and some of them you need to sort of already be good at, i.e. have the stats that they raise, in order for them to be worth doing. I need experience to get a job, I need a job to get experience, I need experience to get a job, I need a job to get experience, I need experience to get a job, I need a job to get The game starts to open up more when you've got some money in your wallet, whether by farming or adventuring, or by winning a prize in the Harvest Festival. Princess Maker 1's Harvest Festivals, previously a rather limited affair, return in Princess Maker 2. Each October, the Harvest Festival hosts 4 events meant to test your stats: the Combat Tournament, the Art Festival, the Dance Party, and the Cooking Contest. Because of the associated stats and how you build them, some of these are more difficult than others. The quote-unquote ideal Harvest Festival strategy is to make your daughter's birthday October 1st, so that you skip the first Harvest Festival and thus have a whole year to meet the requirements to win the cooking contest. The Combat Tournament is particularly interesting though, because you're rewarded both at the end and for every fight that you succeed in, but your first opponent is random. You don't get, say, the easiest opponent first, so your progress in the tournament ladder scales with your progress through the game. No. Your 10-year-old could potentially get matched against the 3-time tournament champion. So, yeah, it's a little unbalanced. Of course, I complain because I like the game. There is satisfaction in succeeding at events that were previously utterly impossible, and in terms of feeling like you really are watching your daughter grow up, Princess Maker 2 absolutely nails it. Princess Maker 1 laid out the groundwork for a series, but the additions and improvements that Princess Maker 2 made really pulled it all together into something special. And even with its downsides and general oddities, it holds its own with the features that future installments would get rid of, from reputation systems to even just this way of doing the schedule. It's also, probably the one that remains the most questionable in terms of content, particularly given that one of the endings has the daughter marry the player. Yeah, that's what grooming is, and that ain't right. Princess Maker 2 also got a re-release by CFK, which hit Steam on September 28, 2016. The Steam release, titled Princess Maker 2 Refine, is, again, a somewhat censored version, though in comparison to Princess Maker Refine, I find it a little bit more bearable overall. Most of the things I don't like about it are minor, bordering on nitpicky. I find the glowing bars distracting and hard to read, the large font abbreviated titles for stats more confusing than helpful, and it bugs me that the fish painting stands out so much. What really drags this release down, though, is the translation by CFK. It's disappointing to say the least. Not only does it lack the flair and immersive styling of the Soft Egg translation, it's oftentimes barely English, much like the other CFK translations. Now, I'm sure there are legal reasons that the Soft Egg translation could not be used, but I can't play Princess Maker 2 Refine without feeling its absence acutely. Tim Trepich, whose name I hope I pronounced correctly, of Soft Egg said as much on their website. We felt that it was important to get the game mostly translated before showing it to potential distributors, as much of the game's charm is lost if you can't read the text. So while the CFK translation is passable, playable at the very least, it's not much more, and in the face of a superior translation, that stands out. But now we're moving on to Princess Maker 3. Originally released for PlayStation on January 24, 1997, and later for Sega Saturn and Windows, Princess Maker 3 Fairy Tales Come True shook things up a little bit. One of the first things new players will notice is you get your own job now. Where in both previous games you were a war hero, retired after dueling Satan himself, you now have a selection of other strong, respectable jobs to choose from, like juggling. Your job has an impact not only on the stats that your daughter starts out with, but on what your home looks like, the amount of money you start with, the amount you get yearly, and the amount you can fall into debt, which is possible now where it wasn't before. This means that your starting conditions can vary greatly between the 6 jobs, which, on the one hand, means you can accidentally set yourself to hard mode without realizing it, but on the other, helps virtually eliminate the Princess Maker 2 problem of railroading. This is part of what makes Princess Maker 3 an easier, or at the very least, less punishing installment to the series. It can still be punishing. The penalties for getting sick are steeper, not only wasting your time but actively draining your stats, and giving your daughter free time to work off her stress can have a variety of other outcomes, some unfavorable, like causing her to gain weight, which you have to spend money to reverse. Overall though, the amount of times this can happen and the degree to which it messes up your game are less brutal. Princess Maker 3 has also changed the way the schedule works, and pretty significantly. Each activity takes half a month, but you can queue as many as you want in advance. In between scheduled activities, you'll always return back to the house, where you can do all the usual things like talking to your daughter or checking stats, but you can also do this mid-activity by right-clicking. This means that, theoretically, you never have to return to the house at all. Though in practice, I find it a little hard to get all my thoughts together that way, and it's difficult to remember to talk to your daughter, which is an important stat booster, when all the activities are queued up together. Another important change Princess Maker 3 brings to the table is moods. Moods affect how your daughter behaves, whether she works well or not, and which stats go up and down, and how quickly, when she does work. The mood that your daughter is in is influenced by her stats, and, perhaps most importantly, the job that you pick for yourself at the start of the game will automatically set her mood to begin with. In my case, because starting as the fallen noble gives her a lot of pride, she starts with a smug mood, which makes her unbearable to look at, but also means she doesn't want to do things like farm work. Interestingly, on the subject of work, while Princess Maker 1 and 2 would give you bonuses for completing full work assignments perfectly, this doesn't seem to be possible in Princess Maker 3, or at the very least, it's far less likely. Your daughter will be better at certain jobs than others, and this is given to you as a percentage, rather than a flat number of days worked. I believe her proficiency at a job is mostly based on her existing stats, as in Princess Maker 1 and 2, but her mood does affective, and she might even just not want to do particular jobs. Princess Maker 3, maybe deliberately, makes the mechanical details, the numbers game part of princess making, a bit fuzzier. But in doing so, it also makes the raising a child part a bit more organic, more natural by way of being unpredictable. Some details about the game also don't show on the status screen. Specifically, class exams have returned from Princess Maker 1. Every so often, a class you're attending will have an exam, and your performance in that exam will be determined not only by how your associated stat is doing, but by how often you attend that class. So, while you might numerically be very good at a subject, if you haven't been regularly taking the class, you'll perform poorly on the exam, which reflects poorly on your stats, and makes your rival laugh at you. Every class, except, diet class, thank god, has a possible rival in it, whom you can then become friends with, and they'll send you birthday presents and such. It's very cute. Princess Maker 3 also includes 3 times the usual number of festivals. We have the Standard Harvest Festival, the New Year Festival, and the Cherry Blossom Festival. This time around, instead of picking which contest to compete in, each festival only has one competition, so you can compete in all of them. The former Princess Maker princesses will also show up to upstage you, which honestly just introduces some questions about canon? Anyway. Princess Maker 3 is probably my favorite in the series, honestly. The new schedule makes it go by a lot faster, the daughter has new, interesting personality aspects, there's still a boatload of endings, and you know what? I actually feel like I've done pretty well. She became a maid? I'm alright. I'm fine. Princess Maker 3 is, however, unfortunately missing the entire adventure segment of the previous games, which means it ends up feeling a little content light overall, sort of like a Diet Dr. Princess Maker. The same, but different. Baby's first Princess Maker. Princess Maker 3 became available on Steam on June 27, 2017, again published by CFK, who don't appear to have the rights to Princess Maker 4, so whoops, we're gonna have to skip that one for this video. Sorry, I can't find a place to acquire it, sorry! Princess Maker 5, released March 3rd, 2007 for Windows and later PlayStation 2, represents a huge jump in the series, not only in terms of release date, 10 years after Princess Maker 3 and 2 years after Princess Maker 4, but in terms of, well, game. Princess Maker 5 takes place in the modern day, and from what I can gather from the, entirely Japanese intro on this allegedly translated game, the idea is that in the midst of a siege on her kingdom, a princess candidate is saved from death by being transported to our world via the moon? Cube, returning from the second game, then entrusts this amnesiac 10-year-old to us, to raise in preparation for when she'll return to her world and become a true princess. Oh, and if you're an English player, you don't get a hint about any of this until your 3rd year into the game. So if I'm wrong, don't at me. I'm trying to do you a favor. This game employs a similar parent-job mechanic as Princess Maker 3, but in addition to this, you're allowed to be a mom now. You're also allowed to supply a first name in addition to a last name for yourself, and most importantly, you're given a tutorial, from top to bottom, in full, exhausting detail. This also includes Cube giving you a tip to increase guts, this game's equivalent of constitution or stamina, for the early game, for the same reason you would do so in previous installments. However, stat acquisition has changed from the previous games. This is the modern day, after all. Your daughter has to go to school now, all the time. As such, the schedule now works on a weekly basis, not monthly, and you assign additional classes, piano lessons, karate, cram school, as well as work, nanny, janitor, and so on, into afternoon time slots after her regular school schedule. The amount of time slots you get depends on the curfew you set at the beginning of the month, which in turn impacts her stress. Any free time you give her, she can spend however she likes, as in Princess Maker 3, though now that doesn't mean her stress will necessarily go down. Every Sunday is a free day. This is when you set the schedule for the next week, and it's also when you get to spend time with your daughter, talking to her and either letting her spend the whole day as free time, or going out into the city with her to shop, attend events, and burn off stress in a variety of ways. The map, which covers both Himemiya, the sleepy town where your house is, and Hamazaki, the bustling city next door, is sort of massive and unfortunately difficult to navigate. There are only a few icons for landmarks, and they're not exactly super helpful. Going into the city and trying to decide which of the identical skyscrapers is the one you want is basically a question of memory, and you only have a limited amount of time to spend in the city. Looking at the clock in the top left, you can see your time sectioned off by the hour. Making a selection reduces the amount of time you have remaining. Now, what Princess Maker 5 defines a selection is where this gets a little tricky. Some buildings, which have multiple locations within them, such as the Hamazaki Station building, which encompasses the movie theater, exhibition hall, Starbucks Coffee, and so on, don't count as a selection, so it doesn't take time to see what your actual destinations are. However, these destinations themselves count as selections, as do independent buildings with no interior destinations, which means that you can potentially arrive at a destination and realize, oh, there's nothing for me to do here. Whether that's because you made a mistake, because you intended to shop but there's nothing you want, or because the act of traveling has eaten the time you would have spent on an activity. Simulators like this taking into account travel time is not necessarily bad, but this execution of it is really frustrating, makes shopping in particular difficult, and discourages exploring your options within the city. There are also, on this subject, a lot of events that happen, which are all listed in the school newspaper, given to you well ahead of time. This is also a bit much all at once, but vastly preferable to all of them being secret. And for the ones that happen on specific days, you can tell Cube to remind you on the day, which helps to alleviate a little bit of the sudden onset choice paralysis. Princess Maker 5 also brings in an extensive friendship system. When your daughter hangs out with her classmates, she becomes closer with them, raising or lowering stats depending on what that classmate is like, and potentially making other classmates jealous. Interestingly, hanging out with someone you don't know very well can also make them not like you as much. It's a very strange, somewhat flat system where your options essentially boil down to yes and no, but it does bring a lot of life to the game. New potential friends also arise over time, and I'm sure become marriage candidates. I say I'm sure because, Princess Maker 5 became really, really boring. While an objectively beautiful game, featuring a daughter who I absolutely love and oh, I could just squish her little cheeks, one of the side effects of having a schedule that goes week by week with multiple activities per day is that the game takes a lot longer. Previous Princess Maker games took, on average, about 3 hours to play from beginning to end once. This incentivizes the whole play again and get a different ending thing. After 3 hours spent playing Princess Maker 5, I had progressed to year 2. Barely. And I started skipping the text after a while. As a reminder, the game progresses from age 10 to age 18, which makes this installment take, on average, 8 times as long as the others. Now, of course, 3 hours makes for a rather short game, but that's the purpose of replayability. In a game where it's incredibly possible, and even expected, for you to make terrible mistakes or end up with an unsatisfactory outcome, I don't really want to dump hours and hours into a bad run. In a way, this makes Princess Maker 5 a completely different game from its predecessors. It makes it the kind of game you're likely to play only once. And perhaps the idea then is to foster a stronger connection with your digital daughter. But even so, that didn't end up being enough to keep me going. Shortly after I started skipping text, realizing that the game was repetitive and that I didn't really want to play it to completion, knowing that 24 hours of my misery would make for probably 5 minutes of footage, I also started skipping events. I skipped planning the schedule, too. I started giving her free time instead of going out, and I only went out when I knew she'd get sick if I didn't take her to watch 4 movies in a row. And after 2 years of pretty neglectful parenting, she was totally fine. Maybe not in a position to get the best ending, but doing pretty okay, on her own, without me. And maybe that's how you're meant to play the game, autopiloting until she really needs your attention or there's an event you want to attend, but That's not really a game at that point, is it? Regardless, after a while of clicking through, I wasn't really aiming for an ending anymore. I only wanted to see how they handled adventure mode, which only opens up to you in year 3, which is possibly 9 hours in. Well, I'm glad I didn't play 9 hours to get to it, I'll put it that way. To close off our timeline, Princess Maker 5 was published to Steam May 4th, 2018. And Princess Maker as a franchise is huge. It was a genre builder when it released in '91, inspiring probably countless Japan-only titles, as well as modern indie titles like Long Live the Queen, and creating several spin-offs I don't have time to cover, like the Princess Maker board game, or the 2002 anime Petite Princess Yushi. And as much as I hate the CFK translation, the fact that these games are now freely, legally available outside of Japan through Steam is nonetheless a great win for international gaming in general. Like many series, Princess Maker has its strengths and its weaknesses, but now you know about them, and can, if you like, make an informed decision about which of these pieces of Japan's gaming history you might want to experience for yourself. You can also check out other pieces of gaming history through the other episodes of my Nostalgia Trip show, and even vote on which game I should tackle next through the poll up on Patreon. And special thanks to Lynn, who pledged $5 to put her name up here. You the real MVP. That stands for Most Valuable Princess. Got him!